DJing first?
Yeah. I've been DJing since I could walk. Like literally, like my mother has pictures of me running around with records at my first birthday party, putting records on the turntable, and playing records. And I had an older cousin who had she didn't have, remember back in the 80s you used to have rack systems,
Right.
you have like the turntable, the cassette deck, the tuner. So she had one, and I don't know how she had it hooked up, but she had one that had 2 turntables in the rack. There wasn't a mixer, but you could play both records at the same time.
Right.
And her younger brother, my cousin Kay, he took Michael Jackson. Remember Beat It used to start out with just the drums? Boom, gat, boom, gat. So he took one and started one right after the other. So it was going boom, boom, gat, gat, boom, boom, gat, gat. And I was done from there.
Right.
And so like my at the same time, I had my pops was a jazz organist.
Oh, shit.
So we always had keyboards around the house.
Right.
We always had Casios, and he had a full-on Thomas organ, that had little drum pads on it.
Right.
And so at the same time that I was discovering DJing, I was learning to play keys inadvertently, because as a kid you always follow behind, especially as a young boy, you follow behind what your pops is doing and what your big brother is doing. Right. So my older cousin, who was like my big brother, was the one who got me into early hip hop, and just introducing me. He wasn't a DJ, but introduced me to what DJing was. Right. And then on top of that, I had my father constantly bringing different keyboards into the house, and there was that one summer where Casio came out with the SK1, which was like the first consumer sampler where you could sample like 3 or 4 seconds into and loop it and whatnot. And then my best friend, his older sister, got an SK5 for Christmas that year. She must have had it for about 2 days, and she never saw it again because I took it right to the house.
As you should.
Yeah, and around that same time, I was discovering that a lot of like these records that were out at the time, like Public Enemy, Rebel Without a Pause, and things of that nature. A lot of these, late '80s hip hop classics were. I was digging through my mother's record collection and finding like, oh, this James Brown record is that, and this Isaac Hayes record is that.
Right.
So now I'm with my little Casio, speeding the records up, and putting them in the Casio, and just kind of learning what production was before I even knew that it was called production.
Right.
It was just, these are the same beats that I'm hearing on these records, and now I'm remaking them.
Right.
So that combined with DJing all kind of happened, formatively all at the same time.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about keys, and I used to live down south, and I was around a lot of producers. So the mentality of how they put records together is like so incredible, going through different regions. Because in New York, it's the samplers, the MPCs, the Casios, where I would see them. A lot of these guys have a lot of music theory in their history. I've seen a guy make a whole orchestra of beats just off 88 key motif, and I've always felt like, kind of like Drumline the movie, a lot of producers come from that, and I feel like that's why the South has been capturing music for so long.
Well,
I don't know, how do you...
It's that every region definitely has its sound. If you were coming from like the southern sound, they were still using samples, but they were combining samples with live instrumentation, with keyboards and what have you. Obviously, and it's not to say that we weren't doing that here, but I think it was just done with a different twang, so to speak. There was a bit of a southern twist on it. Things were slower, a bit more down tempo. Same thing, over on the West Coast. Like you listen to a lot of early like Too Short albums or E40, a lot of the Bay Area stuff. A lot of that stuff they were replaying samples, but they were doing it all live. Or the same thing like when Dre was doing it in the G-Funk era. He was replaying a lot of classic George Clinton melodies and things of that nature. What we have now is a result of all of these styles kind of being put in a melting pot. The more that hip hop has spread and everything starts to come back around full circle, the sound starts to change. So now you have a sound that's part East Coast, part Southern, and part West Coast. And the sound that we have now is kind of a result of all of those styles kind of coming together over the years.
Right. I got a question for you. Do you feel the need to, at some point, or have you ever felt the need to reinvent your style of making beats?
You kind of have to, because the times change.
Right.
Along with the times changing, the styles change, and what's happening in the world, what happens in society, whether people realize it or not, as things change, dictates the how music changes. So as different things happen in the world, different things are happening in music. Right. So you can't make the same. I can't make the same music I was making 15 years ago.
Right.
Now, you know, and the analogy I always give people, it's like people always say, I'll give you a classic example. People a lot of times will get on Nas because he never made another Illmatic. Now he's made, I don't know what, 10, 11 albums since then or something like that, somewhere around there. If he made 10 Illmatics, Illmatic wouldn't be special anymore.
Right.
And you'd be over it. Because he's never done that again, you always had that classic to go back and refer to.
Right.
You know, as times changed, you know, we have to progress.
Right.
One of the most famous things about your art is when it starts off with the Just Blaze.
Right.
Like, where did that name come from?
The name itself, it's actually a funny story. It had nothing. I didn't have a name. See, what happened with me was, I kind of got, I guess, I hate to use this word, but discovered before I really thought that I was ready. Like, I didn't have a game plan. Like, this is what I'm gonna do, and this is how I'm gonna attack the game, and this is how I'm gonna do. You know, a lot of people, when they have that dream, they have it all set up and already in their head.
Right.
I was still figuring it out as far as I was concerned. So I was working at a studio called the Cutting Room downtown Manhattan, and I was interning there. And then I ended up getting a job there, and I was working there during the day and working on my craft at night. And my name was just DJ Just, whatever. I didn't really have a name. So, just long story short, ended up hooking up with Mace, and his crew. And this is when he was doing the Harlem World group album. And there's this one record that we were doing. It actually never came out. And rest in peace, Huddy Combs. Walked in the room one day and was like, "Yo, who did this beat?" And I want to say Mace. Mace was like, "That kid over there." And everybody go, "That beat is it's hot." So my man Super Sam, who was one who introduced me to Mace, was like, "Yo, that's your name, Just Hot. You need a name, Just Hot." I'm like, I am not walking around calling myself Just Hot. I'm picturing on records like produced by Just Hot. Nah, bro.
Visionary.
So later on, somebody else came in the room, and they were like, "Yo, who did that beat? This is crazy." And Huddy was like, "That kid over there, Just Hot." And then and they were like, "That beat is blazing." So then I want to say Sam was like, "Yo, that's your name, Just Blaze." And I was still like, "No." And the record, but I never gave him another name.
Right.
So when the record came out, they put on it Just produced by Just Blaze.
Without your consent.
I didn't have an alternative. So my idea was, this is only one record. I can still change the name.
Right.
But then the record went gold. And I'm like, all right. So my first time out, I got paid well, and I went and it went gold, and the name Just Blaze is on it. I guess I got to keep it. And even after that, for a while, I was still like trying to we need to come up with another name.
And you still
And I never could come up with something better. So I just left it as a lot of things in my career kind of just happened like that. Like, it wasn't a master plan.
Blessings, man.
Even the Just Blaze, like, to this day, I can't.
Is that you saying? Who said
That's
that?
me saying that. But
Who forced you to do this?
No. This is what happened. So, all right. So my thing used to be, listen, I'm not gonna come out as a rapper, but I need to establish myself somehow. So I would always ask artists to just shout me out on records.
Right.
So they would just say my name in the beginning of the record, and it was cool. It was whatever.
Right.
And then one day, me and Joe Button are doing Pump It Up. So I'm like, "Y'all need to shout out the top." He's like, "Do it yourself." So we were clowning. You know, we were all clowning in the studio, and he had that one. His very first record, Focus. Yeah. If you remember, he's
I
like,
remember when people thought he was Rasheed Wallace
right.
back in the day.
So if you remember on that record, he has that one part where he's running down the days of the week, and he's like, Mondays, Saturdays, Fridays. So then somebody in the studio cracked a joke like, "Just Blaze." Right. And I went into the studio. They were like, "Yo," I went to the booth. He's like, "Yo, just say it yourself." So I tried it like 10 different ways, and I hated it.
Right.
Because I was like, how do I just say my name? Like, Just Blaze. No.
Right.
Just Blaze. And I don't really have a hefty voice like that. Right. So it was like, so then in making fun of Joe, while I was in the booth, I was like, "Just Blaze." Right. And then I was like, all right, that sounds all right for now. I'll keep that. And then that record dropped, and then it went gold.
Right. Hey, you went platinum,
then it went platinum. So I kind of was like, all right, I'm going to change it later, though. but then I could never come up with nothing better.
Jumpin', them boys up to something. They just spent like 2 or 3 weeks out the country. Them boys up to something, they just not just bluffing. You don't have to call, I hear my dance like Usher. Ooh, I just found my tempo like on DJ.